All right, everyone. Greg Abbott has put Joe Biden on notice, actually penning an op-ed, link in the description, archived, of course, once again asserting Texas' constitutional right to defend itself against invasion. Greg Abbott has effectively labeled the border crisis a form of invasion, and so has decided to guard its border. You have state guard troops down there. You have militia actually organized down there, and they're effectively, in part, ignoring the federal government. And the reason why is quite clear. And it's a fight that Biden should not be waging, but, you know, he's a vegetable, so, I mean, somehow he thinks it's a good idea. I think he's getting the fuzzy end of the lollipop politically on this one. We'll try to explain that as well. There's a lot of political ramifications to the border crisis. The Biden border crisis is effectively an invasion. The federal government is not doing its job. Mayorkas was impeached for a reason. It wasn't just political. What's happening is that they're ignoring existing laws that have already been passed. They are in legal effect, but they're not actually executing that law faithfully. Texas says, well, if you're not going to do it, we'll do it. We'll pick up the slack, we'll absorb the price because we want to have our border secure. It's not a perfect solution because there are other states that border Mexico. You would need all of them to participate too in the basic premise. Arizona, there's activity there as well. But then you have California. California is not really interested in securing the border. If you look at who's leading the state, I don't think he's going to act the same way that Greg Abbott is. Although I do point out that the mayors of Chicago and New York City would probably love it if Gavin Newsom did so. He's asserting the constitutional right, and it is one, of Texas to repel invaders. Now, that doesn't mean that every Tom, Dick, or Harry that's coming across the border is attempting to invade the United States. Some of these people are legit asylum seekers. But how do you tell who's who? Right now, the Biden administration doesn't even require that you provide any proof of what country you're from. So the asylum-seeking process is fundamentally flawed. It's totally broken because there's no actual way to determine whether the person's an asylum seeker. They could be from a country which would be ineligible for seeking asylum, but they say, well, I don't have a passport. Yeah, this is my name and this is where I'm from. It's a country that qualifies, right? I'm sure that there are people down there. I'm sure that there are lawyers for various activistic groups that gather with the illegals that are massing on the southern border on a day-to-day basis and saying, oh, just tell them you're from this country and don't tell them the truth because if you throw your paperwork in the Rio Grande, I mean, it doesn't really matter. Nobody cares. By the way, I wonder if anyone puts nets out or scrounges through that river to find all those documents, or scours the desert and they're like, oh, I've collected 15 passports so far this year. Well, these will fetch a pretty penny now, won't they? Probably not, considering the general countries of origin. Somebody should do that and then sync up with the immigrant database to find out where people are actually from. You bury it in a sand dune or something, and then you get your cell phone and your stipend, and then you go to the migrant hotel and basically you just never show up for your hearing, and then you do whatever you want because there's no rule of law. Now, the political fallout, yes? The political fallout is sheer. The border crisis is arguably now the biggest issue in the election. By the way, it was made a big issue in 2016, much to the benefit of Donald Trump. Joe Biden's handing him ammunition on a day-to-day basis. He's also giving fodder to Greg Abbott and his allies. Biden has lost on this issue. Optically speaking, the American people generally know that the border is a mess. Joe Biden even had to backtrack not long ago and admit that there was a border crisis, but he said, but it's not my fault. Oh, it's Trump's fault. Trump opened up the border. Says somehow Donald Trump, the wall builder, he's the one that's responsible for my own personal immigration policies, like eliminating the need to establish that you actually qualify for asylum, letting you go internally instead of making you remain outside of the U.S. border while you are processed. Those have gone the way of the dinosaur. Catch and release is definitely now a thing again. Yeah, there have been, I like it when people simps for Joe Biden will say he's not weak on the border, he's deported a record number of people. Yeah, that's because a record number of people are coming. You almost can't help but deport more people. If you've got 4 times as many people pouring across the border, you're going to get more deportations. By the way, I noticed that those numbers deviate a little bit as far as their gradient, the ratio involved. That's because there's less will and there's less ways to do it. Part of the problem is just that people got the memo that the border is basically open, so they storm the border, and even where it's not open, there are too many people to catch, there are too many people to release, and there are too many people to process. Meanwhile, the federal government actively standing in the way of people that are trying to solve the problem. ignoring the laws that were already passed by several incarnations of Congress. We already have laws regarding entry into the United States, legally and illegally. And I feel really sad for people from those same countries that come in legally, and they do the paperwork, and they file the forms, and they hired the immigration lawyer, and they kept their nose clean and did everything goddamn right. People will still look down on them because, oh, you're from Mexico? Oh, did you cross the Rio Grande? They're comparing them to a bunch of illegals, and the Democrats practically campaign on this, much to their detriment with Hispanic voters. You do realize that not everyone named Pablo came over illegally, right? Or Catalina. Apparently they didn't get the memo about that either. Biden's nuts. The fact that he's even waging this battle doesn't even at this point make sense. You're whining and dining the far left, like the Rashida Tlaibs, etc., who you're pissing off with your stance on Gaza, I would note. Look at the Michigan primary suggestion by, was it Tlaib? Or was it one of the other Geek Squad morons? I can't remember exactly which one it was. They all sort of run together because they're all clones of one another ideologically. You're trying to whine and dine the far left voting bloc, while alienating virtually all independent voters in the entire country. You're not going to make inroads with partisan Republicans. You've got the partisan Dems locked down. You're looking at a few million really far leftoids that want an open border. People like Beto O'Rourke who literally campaigned on, well, we shouldn't be building border wall, we should be tearing the wall down. And he did the televangelist thing. He was like gyrating around. He looked like Joel Osteen, actually. Joel Osteen during a mass shooting event. And, but you're alienating, I mean, the vast bulk of voters in the country now is independent. They may have ideological leanings. Most of them don't lean towards wanting a completely open border. They side with Trump more than they side with Joe Biden. They're more likely to support a completely closed border, like a state of emergency along the border nobody can come across. Even if you have an asylum seeker claim, they'd probably support that before they would support what's currently going on. Biden is oblivious to this. He just doesn't understand. It's like he's so far out to lunch, and the people behind the scenes actually calling the shots, it's almost like they fucking hate him. Because they're not saying, Mr. President, we need to address this issue. 2 million people are slated to illegally cross the border this year. It's too many people. The economy is not going to be able to absorb the impact. The southern states are overrun. There's no way that we can legally prevent them from busing the migrants and illegals and asylum seekers, because there's a whole slurry of different categories of people, to Chicago or New York, overrunning them. Then they filter out into neighboring communities, alienating voters, and they're all angry at you because they judge you as responsible for national defense and therefore for the U.S. border. No staffer has bothered to sit him down and talk to him about this. But then again, he has memory problems, so he probably just goddamn forgot what they said 10 minutes later and said, where's my ice cream? Come on, man. Corn Pop stole it. Go get him. And then Joe huddles down the hallway to go find Corn Pop or something. You could probably trick him into doing that. Almost sad. It's like towards the end when Ronald Reagan's security service, the Secret Service that was assigned to him, apparently they would dump leaves in the pool because his favorite activity was cleaning the pool. And he'd clean it and then he'd dodder around. He didn't have anything to do. He was bored, so they would secretly put more leaves in it. But he forgot that he just cleaned the pool, and so he would do that for hours on end. It's like, somebody do that for Joe. Can you just put him out to pasture and humor him for a while? Like, at some point, the elder abuse claims maybe 3 or 4 years ago may have been hyperbolic, but at this point, I'm not so sure. Greg Abbott has won this round handily, and Joe Biden's so out to lunch, he doesn't even goddamn understand that. That's about all. Peace out.